This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our returning celebrity guest. You know him from episodes like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Lost in Translation, Gran Torino, Shane, and A Fistful of Dollars. The host and creator of the Best Picture cast and a proud member of the Five Timers Club, Kieran B.
Yeah, was that okay? I've been trying to perfect my golf clap.
I liked it. It's glad to see the studio audience as alive and raucous as usual here in the Gmote studios. It is so good to be back at what has become my seasonal residence here at the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast. And, you know, I like to think I give you guys the best years of my lives here, at least the runtime.
The best episodes?
Yeah. The best pods of my lives.
Hopefully better than Virginia Mayo.
I don't know. I mean, there's reason and discussion to be had, as there was on a particular BPC episode 42, that she might be a progressive woman. So
I'm Team Mayo over here.
Oh, I'm well aware of that.
As long as we're talking best years of our lives. Otherwise, I'm usually a little more mustard.
Yeah, that also did come up, that you're a dry sandwich guy, and you would offend my mother.
I'm surprised I didn't bring up hot sauce, because I do put hot sauce on sandwiches too.
Ooh,
so I don't know how that goes.
Yeah, Subway. If you get like the breakfast sub, with egg and bacon, you put the Frank's hot sauce on that. Oh,
that shit goes so on everything.
Good.
I don't know. I personally am. I've always been a big mayo guy, but mayo, not Miracle Whip. I don't mess with Miracle Whip.
I've been getting into the vinaigrette. Because I think
vinaigrette's
really
great.
Tastes great on subs.
And you'd like Jersey Mike's.
I know.
I do too. I heard that Danny DeVito Jersey Mike's reference a couple weeks ago.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So unfortunate that you're joining us on an evening that is a little bit dour for you, but we, of course, will help to suffice with an episode I think all three of us have massively over-prepared for. I did not want to be underprepared on my own show. So let's see here. I think I watched the movie thrice, which was probably at least a time and a half more than I probably needed to. I really started to look for flaws in the second one and the third one, and I just couldn't really come up with a whole lot. There are a few things I can nitpick, but it's hard to find things.
Can I start a new segment for the show now, which is where we call out presumptuous bullshit thrice?
It's a good metal band.
You're going to come after me for presumptuousness?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Here's Dana, man of the people again.
Yes.
For those on audio, an eye roll was had.
Oh, trust me. Between the two of us, who had the more privileged upbringing?
Okay, what difference does that make?
Your
ability to be in touch with the common man. They just need to participate in a dinner event with you at any given restaurant.
Tisk, tisk.
Anyway, we're going to alienate our guest here, and we're here to discuss the best years of our lives, a revisit episode, almost 4 years in the making. So the last time we discussed this was, I believe, our episode 17, and it was June 4th of 2020. For those of you who choose to remember that particular contentious week in time, I, for the love of God, don't know why I went back and listened to our old episode. You can still do so. I would suggest skipping the first 8 minutes of that show, as the George Floyd talk without mentioning the name George Floyd is rather uncomfortable, and I don't know what we thought we were doing, two Midwestern white guys commenting on that situation. I guess we took it with some seriousness, but it does not age well. Classicness score is probably a 0.5.
Well, I want to say, too, is the dour evening that Tom was referring to that I'm having is a different kind of dour than the episode 4 years ago. So my high school baseball team just lost in the county finals. It's really not that. I'm okay over here. Everybody, don't worry. We move on. We live to play another day. Every season's got to end.
Yeah, the scotch you're drinking probably helps.
Yeah, 21-year-old Glenn Levitt. That's right. I got to break out the good stuff for the end of the season and the start of a new Gmote episode. So here we go.
All right.
Any new news to share for the Best Picture cast?
Oh, good stuff going on at Best Picture cast. We have a bunch of releases coming out pretty much every Monday. We just dropped The Last Emperor here this past week. We did. We joined you in doing Gone with the Wind.
Okay.
So that one's out as well. And we have upcoming our tournament winner for the comedy tournament, Airplane. We're going to do an episode on that. Of course, on the feed, our monthly news episode will be coming out soon, too. And I believe we're tackling Marty coming up here.
Okay.
So, yeah, a little New York flick. So
certainly an underrated Best Picture winner, in my opinion. I
very
much relate to Borgnine's character in that film.
And the shortest running Best Picture winner by
Is
runtime.
it really?
Yeah.
I guess I hadn't thought of that, but that makes sense.
And then we're revisiting our first 45 rankings, which is kind of our most epic episode it was like a 5-hour episode or so. We're going to do a much shorter version, but we're just going to kind of look over that and get some thoughts in on that one. I know that's one you listen to there, Tom.
You say that now, and I just imagine this will be a 6.5-hour marathon, something I have to digest on a Saturday. That's the only way I'd do it in one sitting.
You never know, man. You just never know over here at BPC.
Oh, that's going to take you forever to edit. So I do not envy you.
I'm looking forward to it because I have been a notoriously bad sleeper my entire life. And so I sleep with a pillow speaker. So I'll put on podcasts once in a while or Sirius XM radio and have it on because I wake up all the time. So I'll put on your podcast, like a whole stream of about 7 or 8 of them. and I'm sleeping and I wake up through and hear bits and pieces, and then I'll listen in the office periodically, and then I'll go, oh, well, that makes more sense now that I'm not sleeping through half of it.
Well, definitely, I appreciate all the listeners there. That's a cool way to watch it. I thought you were going to say I used to have trouble sleeping until I found Best Picture cast, and now I go right out.
No, but I am surprised that you were gracious enough to join us for a Best Picture winner this evening. This was your episode 42, I think, that you published around Christmas in 2021.
Yes.
This will most likely be the highest rated film that you have discussed on this show on our Grand Master list. I think the highest one that you had previously had is like barely holding in the top 100, if I remember
Shane,
right.
I believe, right? Shane is the highest one.
Yep.
Oh, that's right. That's at 75 currently. So this one currently, as it sits, is number 12 on our list. And at the time that we originally discussed it, it was number 2 behind only Back to the Future, which we had done that week and I alluded to. And I do think that is ripe in line for a complete redo with the original guests now that our technology is so much more advanced. I will have to reinvite my uncle and his friends back on from Germany to see if they can do this massive Back to the Future redo.
Wow.
Redeem things. But that'll be an interesting episode because I recorded that in the middle of a week. We had so many technology issues with Skype and internet connections and whatever else. And my dad was not on that show because I think he was working at the time. So if we redo that one, it's going to be like a celebratory type reinitiation or something. I don't know. But that's at least a possibility down the road here.
Yeah, exciting. And the irony, I guess, of having, I don't know if that's the right form of irony, but if having me on for this one is like the episodes on Mom are traditionally kind of like deep cuts and movies that are not really, even on their best day, going to climb the highest of rankings here at Gmote. So coming in, and I said I've wanted to be on a revisited, so coming in on a top tier revisited, and I believe the next one that I'm scheduled for, 12 Angry Men, is the same elite standing. So I'm excited to kind of throw my hat in here with the big boys.
Not this Gmote hat, I hope.
No, actually, I should have my Gmod hat on. But when we take a break, I'll put it back on to really get ready for the rubric. Yeah.
Yeah, 12 Angry Men would be the highest one theoretically, depending on how this one grades out this evening. Currently, 12 Angry Men is number 3 on our list.
Baby.
Only behind The Dark Knight, of which you have your own opinions on, whether they be right or wrong, and Jaws.
I don't want to subject the listener to my opinions on that right now. It's the current reigning champion. Don't let me besmirch anything.
I'm still trying to look for a 12 Angry Men outlier person. I've been told this person does not exist, but one who likes the movie but is able to nitpick it just enough. Kind of like my sister did with Casablanca, and just slightly alter the scores just enough to give our list a little bit more credibility. But I digress. So if we're ready, let's start it off and head back to 1946. Tonight, for our 212th episode, we revisit the Best Picture winner of 1946, The Best Years of Our Lives. Directed by William Wyler, written by Robert E. Sherwood. Music by Hugo Friedhofer and Emil Newman. Starring Myrna Loy as Millie Stephenson, Fredric March as Technical Sergeant Al Stephenson, Dana Andrews as Captain Fred Derry, Teresa Wright as Peggy Stephenson, Virginia Mayo as Marie Derry, Kathy O'Donnell as Wilma Cameron. I guess I didn't know her last name the entire time. Hoagie Carmichael as Butch Engel, also a last name I didn't know. Harold Russell as Petty Officer Second Class Homer Parrish. Gladys George as Hortense Derry. Roman Bonin as Pat Derry. That's quite a name. Ray Collins as Mr. Milton. Minna Gambell as Mrs. Parrish. Walter Baldwin as Mr. Parrish. And Steve Cochran as Cliff. Recognition for this movie, The Best Years of Our Lives, premiered at Radio City Music Hall on November 21, 1946. On a budget of between $2.1 to $3 million, it would go on to gross roughly $23.7 million over its lifetime, finishing as the number one film of 1946 to 1947, according to Variety. If adjusted for inflation, it is estimated that The Best Years of Our Lives would be the 87th highest grossing film of all time, and number 4 for all films released in the 1940s, behind only what? Any guesses?
In the 40s.
Yes.
Ooh. How about The Wizard of Oz?
39.
That was 1939.
Yeah.
Snow White.
Ooh, good guess.
I believe Snow White was also in the late 1930s.
I thought it was 40.
No, Pinocchio and Fantasia are both 1940.
Okay.
So then Bambi was also in there. So if you throw that one in there, I guess it might be number 5 now that I'm recalculating here. But
Bambi was a dud, though.
Box office adjusted wise, it actually did quite well, apparently. I think it was in subsequent re-releases.
Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah.
Because that almost sunk them.
So the only live action film to actually finish ahead of this, The Bells of St. Mary's.
Ah, damn it. I should have gotten that. That one I should have gotten. I mean, come on. Michael Corleone was going to see it with his wife in The Godfather, right?
The Best Years of Our Lives is the 6th most attended film of all time in the United Kingdom, with over 20 million tickets sold. It was universally praised by critics at the time, and it would be recognized by the Academy Awards with 8 nominations for Picture, Director for William Wyler, Actor for Fredric March, Supporting Actor for Harold Russell, Screenplay for Robert E. Sherwood, Film Editing Original Score for Friedhofer, and Sound, and 2 special nominations, an honorary award for Russell, and the Thalberg Humanitarian Award for Samuel Goldwyn. The only nomination it did not win was for Best Sound. The film was included by the American Film Institute at number 37 in its 1998 AFI's 100 Years and 100 Movies, and at number 11 in its 2006 AFI's 100 Years, 100 Cheers, and at number 37 again in 2007 for 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition. It has been included at number 6 on all 3 of my annual Best Picture ranking lists. You can go find those on our website, RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmode Podcast. And in 1989, The Best Years of Our Lives was one of the first 25 films selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. The Best Years of Our Lives currently holds a 97% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 93 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film? Please remind everyone from 4 years ago that didn't listen to the original episode, which is available on the website,
Yes.
what your connection to this movie is.
I'm almost about 99% positive that my dad saw this movie. It may have been his first movie he saw in the theater at age 5. And he took an instant like to one Dana Andrews, and I am named after him.
I don't know if you get much closer connections than that.
That's amazing. I love that.
My dad would talk about this film anytime, every once in a while. Dana Andrews, because of his career kind of tanking and his alcoholism, would show up on like Love Boat. And if we were all as a family sitting around watching TV on Saturday night, or I think it was Saturday night, Love Boat was on, and Dana Andrews would be on, he would go on about this film for about 5 or 10 minutes, talking about Dana Andrews and how I got my name.
Now, as for your personal relationship in seeing the film,
it took a long time before I got around to seeing the film.
I believe it's only in the last like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. I think I saw it one time before we did the broadcast, or the first podcast about it. And, I've seen it a few times since. And I'm amazed at really how great of a movie it is, and how really poignant it is to people coming back from military conflict and things that altered their perception of reality.
I would agree. I think this film ages extraordinarily well for some of the subject material it's covering, and for how glossy some of the subject material can be brushed over in the 1940s. They weren't always as adept with every movie at really digging into a topic in the way I think we explored probably from about the 1970s on, when we were much more capable of addressing deeper issues post Hays Code. I wouldn't say swept under the rug, but not covered on a similar level. They couldn't take quite the dark turns that you could later, in movie history.
I would point out that part of the relationship of this movie and reality is the fact that William Wyler was one of them. There was a documentary that was released a few years ago that I watched called Five Came Back. And it was the story of 5 film directors who joined the military and did documentaries for the military about the war. William Wyler lost about 70% of his hearing from flying on B-17 bombers during World War II over Europe. So he was well aware of what a bomber was, what a bomber crew was. And he suffered from his own elements of post-traumatic stress disorder, because he's filming on a B-17 and there's flak and fighters shooting at the airplane he's in. So I think he was able to bring a level of realism to the story that I did not understand probably the last time we did this show back in season 1, that I've become much more attuned to since, based on that documentary. I think it was available on Netflix, so if anybody's interested,
it was a Netflix original, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was an excellent documentary.
And it covers some of your personal favorites there, Kieran. Billy Wilder was in that film, John Ford, George Stevens, and John Huston, I think, is the 5th one.
And no, that's the 4th one. The 5th one is...
I already said all 5.
No, you missed one.
I couldn't have missed one. That's 5 people.
Because it included It's a Wonderful Life.
Capra?
Capra.
So which one of those was not featured? Because...
Stevens, Wyler, Ford.
Wyler,
Capra.
That's the
and
5.
I said Huston.
So Wilder is not one of them, because Wilder isn't American.
And you're probably right.
Yeah,
he's from Poland.
Or wasn't he Austrian?
Oh yeah, he's European though. William Wyler wasn't the only one involved with the movie that was, a veteran as well. Most of the crew behind the scenes, from the DP to the film editor to the music director, were all veterans. A lot of the people involved were as well. So that kind of created a real sort of ambiance around the film as they made it as well.
Certainly. And I think that some of the wholesome nature that I kind of mentioned a minute ago of this film is what has helped it, I would say, age as well as it has. That it's a much more palatable look. That it, even though it's tackling difficult subject material, it's not a sad movie to watch in a way that I think The Deer Hunter or Coming Home or
Oh, yeah.
even, some of the other ones that we've dealt with of
Born on the 4th of July.
Oof.
sure. Even in a way I think to a degree Forrest Gump can be at times. This one just has a little bit more wholesomeness to it that allows you a moment of peace or levity that I don't think the other ones necessarily afford you. And I think that's only a byproduct of the era in which it was made. Again, I think I forced you to watch this the first time when we had one of those that we recorded off of TCM on a Sunday, and you'd been talking about this movie forever. And I'm like, all right, I've been trying to complete my list of both the AFI list and the Best Picture list. Let's cross this one off. And we'd sat down and we were both shocked at how good and rewatchable this thing is.
True. I mean, every time I watch it, I'm shocked as to how, this could be released today and no one would have a problem with anything in it. It would be poignant. It would be relevant. People would be talking about it.
I think there'd be a tendency of film Twitter to probably pick it apart a little bit more often than I think it gets a little bit more of a pass for being as old as it is.
You mean your film group?
Yeah, that'd be one place where it would. The fact that it ends on kind of a, I wouldn't say happy note, but, not sad, depressing note, probably would lead certain groups of people in the modern era to be like, well, that's not realistic. Not everything works out for everybody. And that's true. But I also think sometimes you need some escapism in your movies. But
yeah, the dude doesn't have any hands. Like, I mean, come on. Oh yeah, it ended so great for him.
Yeah.
Geez.
But Kieran, what is your personal relationship to the movie?
Yes, yeah. As you mentioned, this is a film we covered on our podcast, Best Picture Cast. And it is one that I watched several years ago, probably at this point, over a decade ago when I was initially going through the list. But more recently, I was able to see this on the big screen this winter with my dad at our local cinema arts center. Yeah, it was a really cool experience. A pretty crowded theater, too, which was fun. They had a little speaker before, and then we went right into it. There's no intermission or anything in this film, so it's pretty much a straight, almost 3-hour film. And one of the fun parts of that viewing is at the beginning when people were getting settled in, there was a gentleman there who was proudly proclaiming that he was there on opening night in Trenton, New Jersey, when this thing first released. So me and my dad looked at each other like, is this guy? And we're doing the math, as you guys say, do you need help with the math? And I think I needed some at this point. So we figured that he must have been, we're figuring, he's in his 90s now and was probably like 11 or 12 back then.
Yeah.
But I was there in Trenton, New Jersey on opening night. It was very cool. So, and a pretty good crowd. The humor, there were little moments of humor that played. A pretty engaging crowd and a very fun experience. So this was over this past winter. So that was pretty recent to this. So my watch for this was a pretty recent rewatch too. So that's something we can talk about in the rewatchable area of this podcast. But yeah, if the listener was hoping that I would be the guy brought in to take you guys down a peg with your best years of our lives takes, you might be a bit disappointed because I love this film.
And it's difficult, I think, not to love. I have introduced this to multiple people. I think this is one of the first films I showed my grandma when she was laid up with her knee surgery last year. She'd never seen the film, and she loved it as well. Now, granted, it was like preaching to the choir a little bit. 1940s, 1950s old classics to my grandma is like catnip. But even so,
Grandma's got good taste.
It's an easy one to introduce people to that don't necessarily like black and white films. And I just think it's engaging. This is one of the few times that I really, truly believe with a film as old as this, that from almost character A to character Z, you just kind of want to hang out with them for an extended period of time. And that's why, even for a film that's 2 hours and 50 minutes long, it really does not feel its length. there are plenty of films that we criticize on here for having slow moments, but I turned to my dad because it was that my second watch through was his first watch through for our prep for the show. And half an hour in, I'm like, this movie's flying. Like, we barely even gotten to Butch's yet, and this movie's like half an hour in. And you're just moving and moving and moving. And I think this is a wonderfully edited film.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is due to the structure and the format of this film. I mean, you have three compelling characters who are all experiencing a similar juncture in their life from different places. But the format of this film is that we have these three compelling characters, and we're going to set up all these different set pieces with them, and we're going to go back and forth to one, and then throughout different periods of the film, we're going to bring them all together. And then they're going to go their separate ways, and we're going to go back to the set. It's really, really structured in a pretty genius fashion for the 40s, and something that would still really work with audiences today. So I really tip my cap to that.
From the structure that you mentioned, I would say it's likened to kind of a modern sitcom aesthetic, that you have the A plot, the B plot, the C plot, and it just interweaves it very well that you don't feel like you're getting shortchanged on any one of them. But they all have some level of drama. There's resolution by the end. You get a kind of mildly happy ending that feels satisfactory, and you get to cheer with the movie. I don't think any of that is misplaced. But again, for a nearly 3-hour film, you feel like you haven't been watching it for more than an hour and a half.
Yeah, and the movie commits to it being 3A storylines as opposed to ABC. You know, they let each guy kind of have his own story and not feel secondary to the others. You know, we can argue about who maybe is the main character of this, but really all three storylines, whichever time you're watching this, you could invest in one more than the other and still have a great experience.
And I would say that, not to step on potential final question of my own, but this is one of the better casted movies, top to bottom, that I can think of from this era.
No arguments here.
I totally agree.
I mean, there are a few small quips that I might have with some kind of extraneous characters. Like, Wilma isn't bringing a ton to that particular character, but you don't necessarily need her to be a quality because we're not spending so much time with her either. And you get so much out of, I would say, the top 5 billed people in this movie that it's not necessary for even Mr. Milton to be a great actor, and yet he is.
Well, let me with Wilma. Okay, let's just, and I don't mean this to be derogatory, but the way she looks, she has those big, sad brown eyes. It's kind of like a deer in the headlight mentality. And it's kind of like she's so in love with Homer, she doesn't care. It doesn't matter to her. And that's the whole commitment. That's the whole thing. He's the one with the problem in this, not her, because he doesn't think it's fair to her. She's like, I don't care. I so worship you that I don't care if you have no hands. I love you. And that's the expression. I don't think they could have cast a better actress for the part based on the way she looks into that camera.
Well, I mean, your mileage may vary a little bit. And again, this is like small nitpicks compared to the massive overarch of this entire period of the movie. Again, she's on screen for what, a combined 15 minutes, and she has maybe 25 lines. Like, if the worst nitpick you can get is like the 7th billed person in the cast, like how bad are we really having to dig?
Yeah. And she is playing kind of a small town, ill-experienced young girl just a few years out of high school. So it's not, it's really not that huge of a gap to really sink in on a nitpick. I think it's a fine job by her, nothing special.
So then what is this film about?
I'll take the reign first. This is the initial and quintessential coming home from war film. I mean, this is about what these men were asked to do, not just for the United States, but for the world, like the role that they were asked to play and how they are greeted back and the struggles that they are faced within their family, within their professional lives, within their physical lives, and what the path is for them and how it's defined moving forward. And, through all that, a film that just really ages brilliantly with some of its, ancestors to come.
If I had to place one word on the totality of what the movie's about, it's acceptance. I think that they're having to accept their place, that while they did this momentous thing, the world didn't stop spinning, the country didn't stop running without them. The country as a whole also has to accept that these guys did something heroic and they deserve a place in society, even if it wasn't the exact same place that they had, or that they deserve something necessarily better because they did this great momentous thing for the country. You have them trying to accept themselves and what they did, whether it's heroic or not. I think all three of them are really trying to deny that they did anything particularly special, which is remnant of a lot of the veterans that I'm sure, have had multiple relationships with over time, that they downplay a lot of their service. And likewise, all of the people that love them, that figured they'd be the same person when they came home, have to accept that this person is a completely different person than when they left. For me, it's all about how much has this period of time, you've changed, they've changed, we've all changed. How much can we accept the change and then reintegrate?
Yeah.
It's in part showing the fact that the guys who had been through it were able to relate to each other better about what their experiences were than people who had not. And the fact that they compartmentalized, they kept their war experiences more or less to themselves. They didn't talk about it, they didn't discuss in large detail the probable horrors that they went through. They kept it to themselves. And how they came back and tried to go back to their original lives and tap down all of the problems and all of the horrible experiences they had. And I'll use as an example, we have a family friend whose father-in-law of his ex-wife now, he passed away. I went to the funeral. They said that he had a box in the closet when they were going through his stuff. They pulled it out and it was army decorations and such, and they had it on display at the funeral. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, do you realize that Wally was 101st Airborne and has a Purple Heart and a several medals from his service at Bastogne? He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and he never told them because he refused to discuss what was taking place and what his life was at that time. He came back and he just moved into society and pretended that none of this happened. And it wasn't until shortly before his death, when he had his oldest son take him to see Saving Private Ryan, and he broke down and started crying about it, that he was able to start talking to some extent, but never completely, about his service.
Isn't that a similar story to James Bradley, the author of Flags of Our Father?
Probably.
I want to say that was how the entire entry point or conceit of him even writing the book is that his dad never talked about the service, and he found his materials, leftovers, whatever, after he had passed away, and then got the idea to write the book and do the research so that he could understand his father that much better.
Yeah, I love all that. One last thing on what the movie's about, because I just want to say, pertaining to the title of the film, The Best Years of Our Lives. I think it is also talking about ways to reestablish and redefine the best years of your lives when some of the best years of your lives were taken away from you through the war. The best years of your physical lives, and then coming home and having to reestablish what the best years of your lives will be.
So is this the true definitive post-war film?
It is for me. It is for me. Because of it's certainly the ancestor of them. If you want to say maybe later on, decades later in the 70s or so, it was perhaps done with more knowledge of the country or whatever. But for me, this is the first one I would go to.
I would tend to agree because it's a lot more hopeful in its message or its ending, what you want to take away from the movie. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge something that Joey R. did in your particular episode, that we're just not very kind to our veterans. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And I'm sure we all acknowledge that as much as we are support our troops, we really don't past the point where they're no longer our troops. But that being said, you want to be somewhat hopeful that the circumstances, again, recognizing I don't think to a person in this country there is anybody that truly dismisses what the service of our service members are doing for us. But you want to be hopeful that their circumstances don't necessarily destroy their lives either. You know, if even if they lose their hands in a very overt way, that they still have something to live on for, commit to, that their life is not necessarily over with their service. That is, their service is not the best years of their lives. The best years of their lives can still be ahead of them.
Well, I think it's the definitive war film because what it does is, even though it's the forerunner of the Deer Hunter and Coming Home and Platoon
Born on the
and
4th.
Born on the 4th of July, those films were all about the individual dealing with the psychological aspects of it. That was not something that happened after World War II. These guys came home, and it wasn't like they could call an 800 number and talk to a counselor. They had to deal with this on their own. And it created a situation that I think ultimately was the triggering point or the conflict with their children in the 60s, where it became this dichotomy between the anti-war movement and the previous generation, which was which was the World War II veterans. And they could not understand each other because they had two very different philosophies. And I would point out that when I was first starting in law, I just happened as a lark to take out Martindale Hubble, which is like a legal directory. And I happened to look up and I started counting all of the lawyers who graduated from law school between 1946 and 1949 in Wisconsin. And I estimated about 1/3 of all lawyers in Wisconsin in 1990 had graduated during those 3 years. Those are all guys who were part of the GI Bill and went to law school. And so they all became the legal community based, and in large part based on the experiences they had in this. So this film portrays how these people moved forward and how they tried to use what they had learned to try to better the country and society in general.
Well, I think that the investments we made post-war are really what kept going. One of the few things to me that aged so poorly about this movie is the speech that Wilma's dad makes about how the economy's going to tank like a year after that. And I'm like, no, buddy, you're about ready for one of the best periods of the economy that we've ever had, between the Marshall Plan investing in Europe and Japan, and between all of the investments we're making in education. Because it wasn't just lawyers. We're talking about doctors. We're talking about architects. We're talking, all these massive professionals, teachers, etc., where people were living very good, comfortable middle-class lives. Whether you're an ad executive or something else, you had the ability to actually make your circumstances. And there are so many people that are better for having been, or at least survived, the war, that built the country on the backing of all these investments. But as far as the film itself goes, I find the overall tone or the message, as difficult as circumstances may be, there is maybe a silver lining, and that hopefulness is what I really take out of the movie, that makes me come back to it in a way that I wouldn't with most of the other films we've mentioned. So are we ready to dig in a little bit further on this? Dad, do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. The Best Years of Our Lives is a deeply moving exploration of the post-war experience, capturing the struggles and triumphs of 3 World War II veterans returning to their small Midwestern town. Al Stephenson, Fredric March, a banker grappling with the disconnect between his pre-war ideals and the changing society he returns to. Fred Derry, Dana Anders, a former bombardier, facing the harsh realities of joblessness and a faltering marriage. And Homer Parrish, Harold Russell, a sailor who must adapt to life after losing both hands in the war. Directed by William Wyler, The Best Years of Our Lives presents a poignant narrative woven with emotional complexity and social relevance. The film is not just about the challenges of reintegration, but also about the enduring strength of the human spirit. It's a reflection on the collective American psyche, a nation learning to heal and move forward. The Best Years of Our Lives stands as a timeless classic, a cinematic masterpiece that resonates as profoundly today as it did in the immediate aftermath of the war.
So, because we did not have the Did You Know section yet when we did the original episode, I'll give a few here. So, let's start. Did you know? To avoid awkwardness when he first met his fellow cast members, Harold Russell made a point of reaching out with his hooks and taking their hands, thus putting them at ease with his disability. Did you know? When Homer is getting ready for bed, he comments that once his artificial hands are removed, he's helpless as a baby. This was added to make his character even more sympathetic. In reality, the actor Harold Russell was capable of putting on his artificial hands with no assistance. Did you know? Virginia Mayo had read the novel Glory for Me and envisioned herself as Marie Derry. After producer Samuel Goldwyn refused to give her the part, she had pictures taken of herself at a local bar. That convinced Goldwyn, who was simultaneously working on The Secret Life of Walter Mitty from 1947, to give her the part over the objections of director William Wyler. Mayo finished the two movies simultaneously, sometimes shooting scenes from both on the same day.
Wow.
Did you know? This was the first time Myrna Loy had worked with William Wyler, and she was wary of his reputation as quote-unquote 90-take Willie. As it turned out, the two got along very well. Did you know? The airplane graveyard where Dana Andrews' character climbs aboard a decommissioned bomber was a real graveyard for thousands of B-17 and B-25 bombers, along with numerous fighter planes. The crew washed down Andrews' bomber, then hit it with dust to make it stick on the forward turret for a grittier look. Though the salvage crew scene was part of the movie, in real life, such work crews did dismantle the old planes to make housing for returning veterans. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 213th episode, we discuss one of the biggest and most celebrated comedies of the 21st century, The Hangover from 2009, celebrating its 15th anniversary. Directed by Todd Phillips, written by John Lucas and Scott Moore, music by Christoph Beck, starring Zach Galifianakis, Bradley Cooper, Ed Helms, Mike Tyson, Heather Graham, and Ken Jeong. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you.
That's REELGOOD.
All right, gentlemen. Now, normally, this would be our spot for Ask Dana Anythings. And we got one in. I'm going to surprise you both. We actually got fan mail. I am shocked, surprised, and
honored.
Yes, that's a good word for it. To receive such mail. Now, it does take a few shots at me, but I'll overlook those. So, to Eliza, her message starts, "Greetings, Tom, Dana, and Scooby-Doo from Down Under. Firstly, I love the show. Your banter and backstories have made the show engaging and even got me motivated to listen to the shows beyond just the movies I've seen, which is a high compliment. If we can get you to even watch the movies that you have seen, again, I would take that. But the ones where you're listening beyond the ones you've even seen, or we get you interested in new movies, high compliment. My favorite segment is the Did You Know? Your show often has me talking back in the car, sometimes in agreement and sometimes in dispute. Which leads me to my Ask Dana Anything questions. I have just finished listening to Gaslight. Thank you again for your listen. Firstly, I yelled in my car after your guest said digestive biscuits are cookies. Digestives were created for digestion. To defend Mr. Andrew Corns, his question was on the basis that it was the line being read by Gaslight that they were digestive biscuits, and his consternation was, what the hell is that? But anyway, they are not American sugar disasters. They are digestive biscuits. Secondly, I yelled at Tom and cheered Dana because of Tom's simplified understanding of domestic violence and coercive control, and glad Dana attempted to school him. Well,
Damn.
you're able to take it however you'd like.
At least she took down Corns first.
I don't mind. I'm obviously in a very easy punching bag, as the revisionist almanac is all but confirmed for me.
Yes.
This made me curious, Dana. How objective do you think your scale score system is? Is it objective on its own, or can the score system be manipulated by user bias? Well, I'm glad she asked you this directly, because I have a response to this myself. There are other questions that I'll continue reading, but I will let you answer the question now.
Of course. Anytime an individual has to state an opinion, it's not objective. You can try to be as objective as you can, but it's in large part based upon your experience, your life, the things you like or dislike. I can try to be as objective as I can about, for example, who the best or greatest president is and who's the worst president. But I can tell you right now, it's going to be based upon my underlying belief, based upon my life and what I believe overall for politics is ultimately going to determine that. So, no, I don't think. I only think that objectivity is maybe a third of whatever anyone states as their opinion. And that's really working hard to try to state that you're being objective.
I will say that it is easier to give a slightly rosier score on movies that you enjoy or like or come to have a new appreciation of, and it's much easier to give a lower score on one that you didn't enjoy. But the nature of the show, and we've tried to remove a lot of the factors that we pass into legacy or impact and significance by actually having some type of attachment or outside figure that allows us to give a little bit more objectivity, even though it is somewhat based on our perspective of things. I've often criticized my father for limiting his perspective on whether a movie has resonance to the, while diverse in age and socioeconomic class, rather homogenous white Midwestern group of our office cohorts when he asks how many people have seen The Best Years of Our Lives or even heard of it. So there is some level of subjectivity or just shared experience in the world where we haven't had those things. Do I think I tend to be a little bit more objective than my co-host? Yes, I do. But,
Oh, bull. I'll go just the opposite, which is I've given pretty good scores for films that are not within my wheelhouse.
And he'll give bad scores to Citizen Kane and then complain that somehow I dragged the score down.
I'll say this, one of the unique things about Gmote, and one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that through the rubric you've kind of taken a good section of your personal opinions of the film away from the discussion, which is different than most podcasts. Like most podcasts are the lead of it is what the person's opinion is on it. And there's many times where I'm listening along and there's a movie that I fucking hate, and you guys are like kissing its ass, and I'm like, ugh, fuck this movie. But then we get to the rubric and you're like 8.59, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a 9. I mean, its significance is a 9, its impact is a 9. I can't argue. And on the flip side, there's other times where you guys are ripping apart a movie that I love, and I'm sitting there like, oh, these guys are killing me. And the rubric comes around and you're fair to it. It goes, well, I didn't like it, but I can't deny that it was up for this many Oscars, or it had this box office number, or it had this. So the rubric does kind of bring the discussion and make it whole a bit. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you for saying as much.
Yes.
I do think that we try and bring in factors, but part of the conceit of the original show in its entirety is by bringing in the rubric, we're trying to redefine what actually greatness is. Because to me, the Sight and Sound poll, which has been the barometer of what a great film is only a subsect of people that are very focused on film, or that they've only seen a certain number of films and they only consider these select few to be the great films of all time. But when the Sight and Sound poll doesn't have a single Spielberg movie in its top 100, can you really call that is the greatest movie? If you want to call it best, I have no qualm with that whatsoever. But you're ignoring all of the just what I would say normal film fans or film goers would be, where a Jaws might be much more appealing, or E.T. You're not getting that by constantly having Citizen Kane be the number one film of all time, and everybody recognize that this is like the great best film that's ever been created. Yeah, it's important, but how many people are going back and revisiting Citizen Kane unless they're in film class?
So, Tom, this is actually perfect that you worded this. I have to ask you this question on behalf of the listeners, just as myself as a listener, because sometimes you'll and I'm sure that you've covered this in length on your podcast before, but maybe for someone who hasn't been there for that, you sometimes casually will just say, well, it may be the best, but it's not the greatest, or it may be the greatest, but it's not the best. And sometimes as a listener, I'm like, well, what? Huh? So in like a condensed couple sentences, like what do you view as the difference between best and greatest?
I think there are films that are of high level of quality. They're extremely well made. They are dealing with difficult subject materials. For example, Schindler's List, an immensely quality film, probably Spielberg's single best directorial work that he's ever done. But because it's not necessarily accessible to the average person at large, because it's not necessarily rewatchable, is it the same level of greatness as something that people are going to pop in much more often? Like, let's even compare it within the decade where he had his 2 Best Director awards. Saving Private Ryan, I find a lot of people rewatching even more than Schindler's List. Now, personally, I think Schindler's List is a better movie and is a more important film. But Saving Private Ryan hits people in a way that is a much more emotional connection. And that's something that can't be measured by the quality of how a film is made, how good the screenplay is. You know, those things do factor into greatness, but they aren't where it stops either. So when I look at Citizen Kane and I say the cinematography is outstanding, the script and the way it's plotted, its acting, its devising are all top notch and inventive for the time. The notion of that being something that resonates with the public at large, and I would say greatness is somewhat fluid in that nature, even though it's objective, isn't necessarily something as Jaws or even 12 Angry Men, which again is like the seminal movie everybody points to as like, if you're going to watch a black and white film and nobody likes black and white films, this is the one that I really like. You know, I don't watch black and white films, but this is the exception. Those are one of the rarities where I would say that has a level of greatness that's outside of that. And when we try and combine in rewatchability and audience score, I kind of think about that. In fact, and I'll add this as an extra factor, something I was thinking about in our rubric this week. We have 6 categories now. I would think legacy and impact and significance based on their timelines. Impact and significance has to usually do with the first 5 years that a movie is out and what it does in that immediate ripple. Legacy is the longer longitudinal history with the movie and how its impact on the public and the industry has been after those immediate 5 years. Those kind of work in tandem. Now, the way that I've crafted novelty with originality and execution and classicness, I actually think those 2 categories really work hand in hand. And rewatchability is the subjectivity of us personally, combined with the audience score from at least Google and Rotten Tomato users, and those 2 work hand in hand. So we have like 3 sets of categories that all work in pairs or in tandem to add up to what is a greater score. I think you could factor in quality of film in some areas, and the rubric has taken on many different lives or many different things over time. So I can't say that our scoring from episode 17 to 212 when we've done this movie are going to mean the same thing. But that's why we do a revisit, is we think about things in a different light as we go along. And with the list being as fluid as it is, right now, The Dark Knight sits as our number 1. But for multiple years, Jaws was our number 1. And we made 3 years from now get a new number 1, 3 weeks from now get a new number 1. I'm excited to see what that will be. I just don't want film lists to be defined by The Godfather and Casablanca and, you know, these certain films that are just always locked at the top, always being considered these are the greatest and there's no discussion.
Now, I will answer the question, and I will be much more succinct. Our scoring takes into account the fact that there are certain films that may be not necessarily as artistic as other films, but they resonate with society and they alter society in general. Jaws, for example, it became such a classic as far as summer blockbuster, the fact that people remember it and think about it. And if you play the soundtrack of Jaws, immediately everybody. I mean, it's been what? How many years?
It'll be the 50th anniversary next year
50th,
when we
50 years.
revisit it.
Yes, you play that bum 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 bum. Immediately everybody knows about it. Okay. There are also taking into account the fact that there are certain movies that become so classic, so inventive that they create a formula that other films start emulating. So you have to take into account impact of society and emulation of the film into account, where the best film does not necessarily have to take into those things into account. And so that's where we're talking about. We're trying to find the nuances of not just the quality of the film, but its impact on people, society, and the industry itself.
Cool.
All right, to continue with our listener question here. It seems legacy and impact are extremely subjective. As a female and Aussie, listening to comments about digestives and violence was definitely emotive. Is your score system only useful for American movies? I'd say, as an Aussie, The Castle and Muriel's Wedding were massive on impact and legacy. Will they be on episode 500? Can I advocate for an Aussie movie show? So there are several questions in there. I will say, if since you may be a newer listener to the show, it seems like by your comments, we have discussed at least a few different foreign films, and I will point you to two specifically. So we did a episode with a guest of ours, a friend of mine at the time, on Three Idiots, and we changed the legacy and impact and significance scoring on those based on the crowds that they were trying to attract. Specifically, even though a lot of our movies are American centric and a lot of our objective standards have to do with American box office or the American Academy Awards, we did create certain levels of legacy. And both films, I know I have only mentioned one so far, but the two films I'm going to mention here, both placed highly in impact and significance and legacy based on the perspective of where they came from and the audience that they were intended to. The other one being Your Name, which, believe it or not, is actually our highest rated on the list. That is the Gmote list, the grand overall list, which you can find at ronnieduncanstudios.com/Gmote podcast. Your Name is actually the highest rated one we have from the last decade, the 2010s.
Wow.
Which shocked me. I had completely forgotten that we had that one as highly as it was. And that's an anime film from Japan. But
it was very good.
Because it was a high-rated box office film, and because it was widely celebrated in the Japanese market, we adjusted the system. So I will say, even though I know your question was technically asked for my co-host here, we would consider Aussie films. We've considered Japanese films. We're going to be venturing out. I know that part of it is that we've had so many American films because we've been trying to grow our audience base, and it's hard for a lot of Americans to do it based on films they haven't seen. But we're willing to take a chance and do some projects every so often, really expand ourselves. So certainly if we have an expanded list of Aussies that would like to see a few films in there, I'd be willing to take those up. And I think we'd give those a fair shot in the way that we have treated other films of similar ilk. So, Dad, did you want to respond to any of that?
I would agree. I think that I find that there's a lot of films that it's partly the fact that we're limited on how much exposure we have to certain international films. But I find that a lot of films are really good. Oh, we watched a Kurosawa film over the weekend that you didn't care for as much as I did. I thought it was great.
That would be High and Low.
High and Low. That was it. So, yeah, I would definitely entertain watching other films or from other countries because I find that there's a lot to enjoy.
Also, we all know Dana drinks his dad juice whilst doing the show, but what is the ultimate movie snack combo? I assume this goes hand in hand with watching so many movies. Don't say pickles and peanut butter. I don't know who at the office put that as their favorite snack on our board this week, but that is that's just wrong.
When I go out to the theater, there are two snacks I normally always want to have. I love popcorn, and the other is Raisinets. I don't know why. I just have always loved Raisinets. If I can't get Raisinets, I'll settle for Milk Duds. And if there was some way of combining them, yeah. Actually, I've had the caramel chocolate pop or covered popcorn, which is really good. Too good almost. But that's my standard when I'm at the theater.
So I would like to say a massive thank you to our fan Eliza from Australia. We appreciate the mail. If you would like, you can certainly submit more questions, and we plan to read them on air. So I think this is really only one of the very few times that we've gotten feedback. The other times we have read them live on air. So if you want to get in before the getting gets good and we start getting massive tons of mail 5 seasons in, I certainly appreciate it. And thank you for the kind words, even if apparently I deeply offended your sense of domestic violence. I apologize. I'd have to listen back to that episode. Okay. That will take us to our Stanley rubric. So, if you've not listened to one of our revisit episodes before, we won't cover all of the same topics that we normally do in all of the categories. If you want that, again, you can attempt to listen to our original show. I would skip the first like 8 to 10 minutes. You're not going to miss a whole lot. It's much more raw. We have definitely improved both technologically and editing and just plain old speaking. There are a lot of ands, ums, and buts and so's and other filler words that just were like nails on a chalkboard to me this week. But
I enjoyed the episode quite a bit.
Well, thank you. The conceit of the revisit episodes is to take a look at what our score was the previous time. And now, ever since I think it was Goodfellas or Taxi Driver last year, we have started to compromise on each of these scores. So what we're going to start with is we'll go with Legacy, which is usually our first score. And that's defined as everything outside of the original 5 years, split between industry and the general audience on how people regard this movie. Is it a high legacy? Is it a low legacy? Has it aged well? I guess some of that's usually reserved for classicness, but I've allowed some to seep into this category as well. We'll each give you our score and compare it with our original legacy score, and then we will compromise on a new score. So, with that, our original score on legacy was an 8.5, going back to episode 17. Dad, do you think we got that right or wrong?
Unfortunately, we got it wrong. In looking back at it and thinking about it and dividing it, I think that the industry is probably at a 4.5. And the reason I'm saying that is because this became the standard of soldiers returning from combat and living in normal society. And again, we've mentioned several of the films already, The Deer Hunter, Platoon, So I think this became the standard that was altered because of that. So I'm going with the 4.5. But having thought about it, this is a film that a large portion of the public has not seen or even heard of. I'll mention to people offhand that, I'm named after Dana Andrews. They have no idea who Dana Andrews is. They have no idea who Fredric March is. They have no idea this film. So unfortunately for the public on legacy over the long term, I have to go with the 2.5. So that gives me a 7 overall.
Wow.
So, Kieran, I will give you the option of going second or third.
Why don't I hear where you're at, Tom, and then I'll give my take this time around. So I want to see if you're kind of closer to where you were back then, or if you, like Dana, have kind of shifted a bit.
So I would agree with my co-host that on an industry perspective, 4.5 seems about right. It's not in the elite company where it's mentioned in the first several. It's not Lawrence of Arabia. It's not Citizen Kane. It's not even like Tokyo Story for some reason recently is like really crept up a lot of these lists. Seven Samurai, it's not the elite first 10 names at the drop of a hat that you're mentioning. 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's not those. but it's in a comfortable second space for, I think, a lot of, at least American perspective critics. The American Film Institute has it kind of in the mid to late 30s. So I think 4.5 is fitting. This is not a forgotten movie in the industry. We know, and I think we mentioned it on our original episode, how I had mentioned Spielberg will watch this, I think, every time he does a movie. He'll show it to the entire crew. And I know he at least watches it once every calendar year. So it's not something that I think is forgotten there. But the public, I'm a little bit softer on. I don't think that it's as widely available to everybody as it probably should be. But what I'm going to incorporate and bring in, something that I started thinking about. All right, for legacy on a audience perspective, one is if you really have to search to find that anyone has ever seen this. Two is if you have only about half of the film nerd community has seen it, because I do separate a little bit between the film nerd and the normies.
As you should.
Three, if most of the film nerd community has seen it, which I think there's probably a good portion of the film nerd community that has seen this, given the outpouring of people, how can this movie be underrated? There are people that have heard of it and seen it. And four is if basically all the film nerd community has seen it and some of the normies have heard and or have some cultural relevance with it. So I'm somewhere between a 3 and a 4. I think there is a significant portion of the film nerd community that's seen this movie, and there are enough people, probably not younger people necessarily, but some people within an age group closer to my father that have seen and or heard of this movie, have an understanding of what it is, and kind of like the film. So I have it at a 3.5 on that side. I have an 8, which is just a half step down from our original 8.5.
Okay, interesting. All right, so I'm ballpark here, but okay, so here's how I look at this. Now, I for the industry, I kind of looked at this in that elite crew because on a lot of those lists, it's usually right there. It's usually toward the top. It's the kind of, to me, the kind of film that, like you said, the Spielbergs, the Scorseses, those types of people are always going to tip their cap to. And you'll now with the people, it's tricky here because for whatever reason, there is a difference between this and the other movies that are in that regular crew. So this is going to be a kind of a bizarre baseball analogy I'm going to throw out there. But if you look at the all-time home run leaders in the MLB, the best years of their lives is kind of the Harmon Killebrew of the all-time home run leaders. You know, it's
Yeah.
It's no Willie Mays or Hank Aaron or Babe Ruth, the ones that always come up with. And if you ask the casual baseball fan, who's Harmon Killebrew, they'll think you just like made up a name for you. But if you take the roid heads out, he's number 8 on the all-time list, which is pretty wild. So the way I kind of look at it is maybe like the industry is kind of like if you asked a Twins fan who Harmon Killebrew was, they'd be like, yeah, it's one of the greatest home run hitters of all time. But if you ask anyone else in the country, they're going to be like, was he a Hall of Famer? I don't know. Or was he just a really good, was he in the 80s or what, So for whatever reason, that the people's legacy is the weird one. So I think I had it at a 4. And I think, Tom, you kind of talked me into that 3.5 there. I have a 5 for the industry and a 3.5 for the people, which goes back to your original 8.5. So that's my initial take. What are your thoughts there? Is it losing a point? Is it losing a half point here?
Now, to let the audience, if this is your first time listening to this is kind of an unusual episode when we do the revisits compared to the normal episodes. Normally, I would just average this out. And so it'd be probably closest to my score since I'm the median point. So what I'll do here, and now we have to kind of compromise and figure out what the true number is. The lowest score among us, I will say, let's start with you, especially since you went first, Dad. You're the furthest away from the two of us. Why should we come towards you?
I'm trying to be as objective as I can. Okay. Because my love for this film is so great. I would just as much like to concede on the public score and come up to match your score. And I really don't have any basis for it other than the fact that, again, I've been talking about this story about how my name came about for 50 years. And most of the time I get blank looks like they've never heard of the film.
And I think that's somewhere where it would fall around, again, the normies, the people who are not like film obsessed, the people who are constantly trying to check boxes off whether they've seen every Best Picture movie or every AFI Top 100 or every Sight and Sound poll movie, or et cetera, et cetera. I would say that there are probably some film fans that are not quite as invested in classic films that might not have seen this. But I do think that there is not necessarily like an overwhelming majority of the public, but at least like, can you give it 10, 15, 20% might have seen and or heard of this movie? I mean, it doesn't have the same cultural relevance of a Gone with the Wind or a Wizard of Oz or Casablanca from the same era, but it is a highly thought of movie by those who have actually seen it. And I do think there is a level to which they introduce other people to it. So I think there's an argument to be made where it's a 3, but maybe not a 2.5, maybe not in a 3.5. Like, I think if anything, we're really trying to hammer out that audience point more than we are the industry.
Yeah, none of my co-hosts at Best Picture Cast had heard of this film until we covered it. Now, I would say the average Best Picture Cast host is closer to a quote unquote normie than a film head. That's the nature of the podcast. What for better or for worse?
Shout out RDB.
Yeah. But if you brought up Best Years of Our Lives to RDB now that he's seen it, he would go on and on and on about his experiences with it. So it's a weird one. So I think maybe moving down from an 8.5 to an 8 seems like it could be fair. I think going below an 8 might be tricky.
I would agree. I think maybe 8 is more appropriate.
Throwing out there too, a Best Picture win from the most nominated Best Director. Is that William Wyler is the most nominated Best Director, I believe?
I believe so. I think he has 11 nominations total. Only one ahead of Scorsese, I think, who has 10.
Yeah, and it's one of his wins. So that in the archives that matters a bit too.
Yeah, I don't think there are going to be too many directors that get more than 2, if not just more than 1, because it becomes such a celebration of their singular accomplishment. I mean, we've had a lot of people in the modern era that have 2. Inarritu, Cuarón, Ang Lee, that are kind of, I wouldn't say like the same as in a category of Spielberg, who's a household name, but we've had a lot of examples of 2. It's hard to get to 3 in a modern era sense.
Yeah, so Wyler has 3 director wins that also won Best Picture too.
I think this was much more of an era where director and picture were almost universally tied. It was rare to have a separation.
Well, you had Stevens. Stevens got 3 wins with 0 Best Picture wins.
That's true. I say that knowing that we've already discussed John Huston, and the only Best Director he won for was a year he did not win Best Picture.
Mm.
All right, let's move to impact and significance.
What did we settle on there, an 8?
Yeah, I think we settled on an 8. So
yes,
for anybody listening at home, an 8 for Legacy will be our new score for that one. So just a half point down. But impact and significance, our original score was a 9.5. I'm having a lot of trouble getting below a 10.
I agree.
It's a 10.
Yeah.
When I stop to think about the impact, how this set the standard for men coming home from combat and trying to reintegrate into society, I mean, this became the standard bearer. I think every film that was based in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s where this happened, I think it owes a hand or a legacy to this film, because I think this really became the quintessential standard of how you present people trying to reintegrate into society.
However, from an audience perspective, the only film that I would necessarily say like had more of a connection with the public from a box office perspective is probably Gone with the Wind. And that should almost have a 5.5 for that category on its own, because it's such a unique experience with how that connected with everyday America that it should be its own section of the hall for that particular half point of the category. To compare this to that would be unsightly. But the fact that this is such a high grossing movie, that this was something that connected not only in the United States, but in the UK, that was exceptionally made, that was critically loved and shared by the public. There are just not a lot of films where you have high critical praise and almost universally nobody deadpanned this at all. And you have the fervor of the audience constantly wanting to see it. You just don't have many of those. So I don't know if I could get to an argument where it's really shifting points away from the 10.
Yeah, I think it returned to theaters a lot throughout that time period too. And like we said at the top of this thing, with the only movie that grossed higher than it in the 40s was basically the first ever major box office sequel. So why and we see today the sequels are basically what lead the box office every year. So yeah, I agree. I'm on board. I mean, to me, this kind of has to be a 10.
All right, so that's going to be an easy settlement point for all three of us then. Let's move to novelty then. Our original score on this one was a 9.5. Did we get this right or wrong? I'll let one of you lead off if you wish.
I'll say if you got it wrong, you didn't get it wrong for being too high. Because to me, I mean, we just talked about this being the original coming home from war, and they were making World War II type of films that didn't look like this, that didn't feel like this, that didn't resonate like this. The fact that it had veterans all over the set within the cast and crew, I don't know. I'd like to hear a case to go lower than this, but I mean, if this is wrong, like I said, it's only because it's not a 10.
Dad, did you have anything to kind of nitpick a little bit?
I mean, we have a disabled veteran coming home and trying to reintegrate. There's nothing else that ever did that.
Hasn't been a lot since either.
No. Coming home with John Voight and Jane Fonda did because he was paralyzed.
But it wasn't incorporating somebody who was an actual, disabled vet. It was somebody playing a disabled vet. I mean, we can't
Correct.
give Born on the 4th of July points for Tom Cruise being in a wheelchair during the movie.
Yeah. But I mean, yes. I mean, they're actually playing it. This guy was a disabled veteran.
And he
I
resonates
agree.
so well cinematically too. He's a spectacle in this film.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
9.5 may be even low. I mean, I could live with 9.5, but yeah.
So what is your official score that you're throwing out then?
I'll stay at the 9.5 simply because it is ultimately a war film. Although there's so much about this that's so unique.
All right. I will do the sacrificial lamb point of view, and I will attempt to nitpick this just ever so slightly. But it's going to be at the margins at best because, again, I had such difficulty trying to find things that I found an issue with in this movie. So one thing we haven't really discussed a lot of that has been discussed both on our original episode and the BPC episode is the cinematography. I think from a storytelling perspective, it's also highly executed. I think from a lot of perspectives, it's a highly executed film. The few spots that I could ever knock this is just a few of the peripheral characters. I don't think Homer's acting performance, the more often you see it, grades as well as the first time when it's like the shock value a little bit of when you see it. But it doesn't mean that the story is any less emotional or resonant. Wilma's plot line, and there again, we're getting into the really nitty gritty where we're talking 9, 10, 11 characters down the cast list that, okay, I have a few picks to knit here. Like the little brother, which we'll address here in the end. That he was apparently so bad they just cut him out of the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Okay. If I were to nitpick the originality, though, I do think there were a couple of films that kind of talked about maybe bridge this if you're really trying to stretch it out a little. Like All Quiet on the Western Front kind of address similar
That's fair.
themes or topics. and we'd done a few kind of things, but most of the war films that were coming out at the time are John Wayne shooting up people on a beach somewhere. It was not this. So
Sands of Iwo Jima.
again, if I was going to nitpick on something, I think I had a 4.5 for the originality of it. And this is something that only I've been doing recently. So this is not officially part of the fuller understanding of novelty, which is normally out of just 10 instead of splitting the category. But if I went a 4.5 for originality and about maybe a 4.5 in execution, just weighed down by the tiniest of things, like the score. So I had kind of a 9-ish.
I like the score in this.
I didn't think the score was bad necessarily. I just, compared to some of the scores that usually sweep me off my feet, I love a good emotionally manipulative score in a way that you hate it, apparently. It's just...
I don't. Did I say I hated the score in this one? I think no. I think my
no. You've
co-host
never said you
I
hated
didn't.
the score. You just say you hate emotionally manipulative scores.
Sometimes.
I've heard you say that multiple times.
Yes.
Whereas that gets me every time.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
I love when the orchestra swells in just the right way.
I just wonder how many films have you covered that are that much more novel than this, though? Is just kind of how I'd phrase that.
Well, one that we covered last week that I went a full 10 on for both parts of it was Midnight Cowboy. I think that's a slightly more audacious film, but that's hitting it at the right moment in time.
Isn't this, though?
I know we gave like a full 10 at one point to Some Like It Hot, which I think in retrospect, when we readdress that show or revisit that movie, I don't think it'll quite score as high. It's hard to say there are many other 10s that are quite as original, but
like Jaws probably flirts with that.
I think it flirted with, but I think even that was like at a 9.75.
Yeah.
Like
So you're kind of saying that no one's a 10 at that point.
I'm not.
The Jazz Singer would be a 10 for novelty because it had talking.
Not for classicness.
Well, yeah, it's weighed down by other categories. You have to be universally acclaimed in all categories in order to get to the top of the list. But I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of all the categories. I guess I could pull it up here for legacy, or novelty. What else has scored a 10? So actually, we have quite a few 10s. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That's
fair.
yes.
Network, Get Out, Do the Right Thing, Sunset Boulevard, 12 Angry Men, Rashomon, and Psycho, and Citizen Kane were all 10s.
All right. I mean, maybe Get Out would be the only one I would say there, just because of just how new it is. That's really it's a little hard
understand.
to I don't have much of an argument with any of the others, though. I mean, Rashomon created a film term. 12 Angry Men is incomparable. Psycho changed the way movies are viewed in theaters. Those are all kind of all fair 10s to me. Does Best Years of Our Lives belong in that class is the question.
Well, and again, to look at some of the other ones we have. So 9.83 is the next highest one, and that's Alien. We had a 9.75 for The Artist. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh my. Wait, The Artist?
Yes.
Because it was a silent film that won Best Picture in an era where there were no silent films.
The Artist is a cover song. Okay, sorry. That's not the Artist podcast. Right.
I like the film. I don't think it rates as high on the list because I, again, was not part of the recording. So
Jaws is a 9.58.
That should be a 10.
And then we have a list. Here's the list of 9.5s. High Noon, On the Waterfront, Taxi Driver, The Wizard of Oz, Vertigo, North by Northwest, The Birds, Blazing Saddles. The Best Years of Our Lives was originally at a 9.5. And the only other one, and you'll love this one, The Grand Budapest Hotel.
Oh, Jesus. It's in heaven. Oh. All right. I'm going to stay on point here. I think based on what you gave me there, I think that Best Years of Our Lives could comfortably be in the 9.5. I think that's fair. I could go on a side tangent about about how aliens a 10 or about how the artist is a 4, but we'll save that for another podcast. But
Yeah, that's fine. If you want to come on the artist revisit,
I don't. No, thank you. No, that's okay. I'll just be a grumpy listener on that one. That's fine.
We'll just consider the dog barking.
Maybe Grant Z will come in and he'll raise the number for you. He's a big artist fan, so I don't know.
Well, he's welcome on anytime. So we'll officially land at a 9.5. So to recap to this point, we have an 8 for legacy, down from an 8.5. We have a 10 for impact and significance, up a half point, and we are at the same score for novelty at 9.5. So far, through 3 categories, we have a net rating of 0.
We're even.
0 change. So before we get to our last 3 categories, we'll take our second break and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our master greatest movies of all time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the greatest movie of all time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 195 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Also, you can follow each individual episode on our website as well. That has the notes for each individual episode with all of our scores, category nominations, and the individual factoids for each episode of the show. Just click the link in the episode description of this episode or go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote podcast to find that. All right, we left off at classicness. Now, originally in this particular category, we had an 8.5. I will admit I am higher than we were originally.
Okay, that's interesting because this was the one category I had beef with you guys on. And if you want me to get to that, I will. But you're kind of already saying that you're more or less thinking that it should be higher anyway. And my beef isn't necessarily with the score itself, but I just thought that, it's a fictional town. So why are there rules to that? The town is too white. I get it. Like, that's not a great choice for a fictional town, but it isn't Cincinnati. It's supposed to be around Cincinnati. So, I mean, there are all white towns in the country or segregated towns in the country, particularly at that time.
Yay, Wisconsin.
Yeah. So I just thought that it seemed tough to penalize the movie in that regard.
I will say it's a less educated opinion on the original episode where we were looking for things and we weren't sure how to define some of the scoring, and we hadn't really gotten to the point where normally how we treat this category, again, for any first-time listeners, is my co-host and I usually started about what we appreciate as a 7, just because there's usually more room for movies to move down the list than there is up. I usually will only move a movie up in classicness if it meets one of 2 criteria. It's either really ahead of its time on a particular subject, or it's timeless, that you could put it on tomorrow and it doesn't feel like it's completely out of place, that it somehow has this essence or quality that it doesn't matter which era you watch it in, it's still somehow the same experience as when it was originally released. And I think probably the best classicness example that I can think of is probably The Wizard of Oz. That movie just doesn't age. It's the same movie whether you watched it in 1939, 1956, 1975, or 2024. But for this particular one, I guess some of the things that I was considering, there are a few dated misunderstandings, such as the notion of you can't call your wife because there aren't phones. If I'm introducing this movie to a 15-year-old kid, not that I would, because I think you have to have maybe an age limitation to anybody who's watching this film to maybe appreciate it a little bit better. I just don't know if a 15-year-old is going to be able to grapple with people coming home from war and World War II and the historical context and all the things that actually make this movie enjoyable and important. So there might be something where I don't introduce it to somebody until 25, maybe 30, but America's understanding and appreciation for World War II combat just generally has receded. We don't really have any World War II veterans still remaining. I'm not sure how many are left, but it's very few. And our appreciation of war that isn't basically Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't know if we have quite the same level, if we have the appreciation for Vietnam that we did 20, 30 years ago when it was much more fresh. It's just hard to quantify what America's appreciation to be able to put these things into context are.
Aren't these kids taking history classes?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I guess maybe I don't come into contact with as many teenagers as I definitely used to, of course. But I don't know how educated the public is on some of the historical context of what this country has been through. And if it's not seen through a rather partisan lens, because even history itself has been somewhat combative of late. Like, if we get to Schindler's List, that's going to have to, unfortunately, be of consideration. How many people don't actually think that that movie is factual?
Well, they should know that we didn't have cell phones in the 40s. That they should have that figured out.
Well, they've never lived in an era without the internet, let alone without like smartphones. So it's hard for me to grasp that there are kids that are turning 21 that were not around for 9/11. That's hard for me to wrap my head around.
Classic example, as a joke, posted on the internet a picture of Abraham Lincoln with the caption that said, this was on Facebook, it said, only believe half of what you read on the internet. Abraham Lincoln, 1864. And my cousin, who's a teacher, a high school teacher, thought that was hilarious. So she printed it off and posted it on the bulletin board in her classroom. And she said a large group of her students came up and said, I never knew Lincoln said that.
And this is what I mean.
Yeah.
But, and here's the but, so the heel turn, if you will, on this category. I find that this movie is timeless, so I give it points up on that. And I do think it's ahead of its time in dealing with some of its subject material. So while I'm not going to go a full 10 for some of the appreciation of things, I can easily go a 9.5.
Where were you at, Dana?
This is one of the categories that I was having the most difficulty with. And as I've said repeatedly on this show, and especially more lately, I put something down initially, and then I start thinking about, am I really at that level once we get to the recording? And so what I have written down on my tablet that I use for my notes versus what I actually think at this moment in time are often different. I had originally written an 8.5. I thought it was not quite as at the 8 that we had, but I started thinking about it. I mean, ultimately, as these three men try to adjust, who are really the stronger characters at times?
It's the women in this movie.
Yeah.
The women in their lives who are stepping up and expressing that we don't exactly understand what you've been through or where you are, but we're here to try to make a life for you back at home.
Maybe this is a controversial take, but I think Fredric March owes his second Oscar to Myrna Loy. I don't think that character works at all if she's not the tough, spunky, snap-witted wife who is standing behind him and kind of holding him up as he's being a drunken lush.
Yeah. Teresa Wright contributes a bit too in that regard. That whole family, well, except the son.
I know. I wish, in retrospect, that Teresa Wright had not ended up completely throwing off Hollywood and saying, screw this, I'm not going to put up with this, and leaving where she would have been as an actress as she matured. I think she could very well have been the greatest female actress of all time. But anyway, going back to the whole issue of classicness, I'm at a 9, but I wouldn't necessarily rule out the 9.5 you have, Tom.
That leaves one person to give their score.
I had a 9. I'm not going to resist it being raised, but a 9 seems kind of fair. I don't fully know where I'm taking the point off of, but I think you guys said, this is more of a category where you start at 7 and you add.
this is the unusual position this evening that I have been the high man. But I will say this. I look at the age of a movie when we're talking timelessness, and the older it is, the more additional points up I will give it. So I'm at a full 2 just on the timelessness. And for being ahead of its time on a particular subject, particularly PTSD, disabilities with veterans issues, I gave an additional full point. So I was at a 10, but with the slight nitpicks, I just knocked it down slightly to a 9.5. But that's what got me there. If
I'm
you
okay
count,
with going up.
I mean, I don't think I'm going to have to twist either
So am I.
arm, but
I'll go to
I'm
9.
good on
that's
that.
just
9.5.
my rough math with it.
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we've improved a full point on that one category alone. Now, rewatchability. Originally for this category, we had an 8. Now, I've watched this thing, I think, at least once a year. But let me introduce a few thoughts that I had on rewatchability, the same that I did with Legacy. So, to put our Kieran B test for rewatchability here,
Here I am.
on putting it on. So this you've created our legal test for rewatchability, whether you would put it on of your own volition and how likely are you to leave it on. So in putting it on, 1 is a movie that I would put on if I was forced to and yet I was still avoiding the movie. 2 is a movie that I would put on only if I had to. 3 is a movie that if I watch it every 5 years is roughly a 3. 4 is one that I would watch about once a year. And 5 is something that I would rewatch when I was sick, that I didn't know what else to watch, or that if it was ever on, I'm sitting down. Well, that gets to leaving it on, but or that I would want to just sit down and introduce someone else to. And the amount of times that I've either put this on for other people or that I think I'm to the point where I'm going to watch this pretty much every Memorial Day, regardless. And I might even accept that it might be a twice a year type of thing where you put it on around Veterans Day too. I'm not quite at a 5 because this isn't something that I'm likely to put on just when I'm like sick. That's reserved to probably about 25 movies that are just in a repeat repertoire of mine. But I'd be at about a 4.5. Okay. Now, in leaving it on, 1 is would turn this off immediately if it started playing anywhere. 2 is a movie I would watch 5 minutes of if there was nothing else on. 3 is a film that I would watch a few scenes, but I don't need to see more than that. If it was in the right circumstance, by the time it gets to a commercial break, I'm good to change the channel. 4 would be a movie that I would watch for a few minutes, but I'm not individually stopping my day, but would plan to rewatch the movie at a later date where I could watch all of it in full. 5 is I'm stopping my day right then and there and I'm watching this film. So with that in mind, I also had a 4.5. This is somewhere between I'm not stopping my entire day, but I'll definitely watch a bit of it, and I may end up just staying and watching the rest of the film whenever it's on. Or if nothing else, if I have something important to do, find a way to come back to this movie because it'll be in the back of my mind at whatever else I'm doing. And I will want to have that completion, like an earworm. You have to complete the song. I have to complete the movie. So I'm at a 4.5 for each side of this. I have a 9. And again, our original score was an 8.
I'd like to hear what Dana has to say here.
This is a film that I watch and I go, why in the world do I not watch this film every 3 or 4 weeks? Because it is so good. There's only one part of the film, one point of the film that drags for me, and I have some level of difficulty with, but for the most part, it just talks to me. It provides so much relevance to the circumstances, the situation, the history. And this is as somebody who is by training and choice a military historian as a hobby, more or less. If this film's on, I'm going to watch it. Even Hoagie Carmichael, I found, just great. I mean, I would have a hard time turning it off. The only downturn would be is if I've had a really long week and it's Friday night and I've had a couple of bourbons and I'm sitting there going, do I want to go to bed or do I want to watch something that will make me laugh so that I can forget about this week? So I'm going to go with a 9 on that basis, which is I have to be in the right frame of mind in order to watch it because of the subject matter.
All right, so we have 2 9s on the board.
Okay. So just to speak to the Kieran B rewatchability thing, because I've listened to a few episodes since that's been established, and you've had some guests on, some either Gen Zers or younger millennials who are like, leave it on. Where would this come on? I don't know what that means. Because I guess they're just streamers, or they're not from the cable era where you put it on and you're flicking through and it pops up. So you could also add into that as if you're going through your HBO Max and it pops up, or it's your Netflix, what's coming up next? Are you going to watch the beginning of it? Are you going to keep it on? Are you going to put it on your watch list? If this movie thrusts itself into your life, are you going to accept it or are you going to reject it? Okay. If you're not familiar with cable and Shawshank Redemption and TNT. All right, fine. Now, I'll admit, get off my lawn.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's me.
Now who's the old guy in the podcast?
Yeah, I accuse him of that regularly, and I probably should lay off a little bit so it has more impact when I do, but there's a reason he gets along a lot better with you than he does with me.
I get along great with you, Tom. I get along great with you. Okay, so I'll admit to a little fatigue with this movie this time around. But again, I just saw it in theaters. It was kind of like a big emotional thing. This movie's also on a lot. Like, it's on TCM a lot. I have my Roku channel set to like the classic films. Sorry, everyone. So this one pops up a lot. So as far as keeping it on, it's not like you, Tom. A 5 would be, I'm stopping what I'm doing. This is what I'm watching. That's like the Whiplashes and the Shawshank Redemptions and such, So this is like a 4 there with that. And then am I going to put it on? I'll put this on yearly, I'll say. Now, is that a 4.5 or a 4? So I'm probably ultimately like an 8.5, an 8 around there or so. It is a near 3-hour long black and white movie. There is that. That's a complicated characteristic to have in the rewatchability category, So even for people who are accustomed to black and white films, accustomed to 3-hour long films. I have it at 8.5. If you guys want to roll with the 9, that's fine. You originally had the 8.
Honestly, I'd be okay possibly even moving it down to the 8.5 on the understanding that watching it 3 times in a week, even I got a little bit kind of exhausted with it. Like, it's not quite Ferris Bueller territory, but okay. It's still a highly rewatchable movie. I'm excited when I put it on, but do I need to watch it 3 times in a week? No, it's not quite that film.
I'm keeping it on. I don't know that I'm finishing it though.
Yeah, which wouldn't put it as a 5, but then even if that's like 4 or 4.5 territory, 8.5 is probably reasonable. I mean, I'd be even willing to take the slight step down because it's still an improvement on our original score and say an 8.75.
That's fine with me.
I can go with 8.5.
Your call, Tom.
I think an 8.5 is fine. I'm not going to have too many on looks. I think this is a movie people probably should see and then rewatch, even if it's not, like one of your all-time favorites. And everybody obviously disagrees on what their favorites could or should be. But, all right. So that takes us then to new audience score. Our original audience score, when we only were incorporating Rotten Tomatoes, was a 9.3. And the audience score for Rotten Tomatoes has not changed in 4 years. It's still at a 93%, so it would be equal to a 9.3. However, when we bring in the Google score, that was an 89. So this moves down 0.2 to a 9.1. So to repeat the categories to this point, our original legacy score was an 8.5. We now have a legacy score of 8. Our original impact and significance score was a 9.5. We now have a 10. Our original novelty score was a 9.5. We kept that novelty score. Our original classicness score was an 8.5. We moved it up to 9.5. And our original rewatchability was an 8. and gave us a new rewatchability score of 8.5. Then for audience score, we moved slightly down from a 9.3 to a 9.1, giving us a final total of 54.6. Our original score was a 53.3 and was currently available at number 12 on our list. Now, obviously, with the new scoring up almost 1.3 points, where would you have a guess that it currently ranks?
I'm going to go with Harmon Killebrew's number 8. How about that? For the 8th on the home run list and 8th on the greatest movie of all time podcast list.
6th.
Okay. So for refreshers, I have had this consistently as my number 6 on our all-time best picture rankings list. But it leapfrogs Godfather Part 2, High Noon, All the President's Men, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Saving Private Ryan to arrive at number 7, just behind The Godfather.
Wow. It even leapfrogged Harmon. That's great stuff. That's I got it. I got it above All the President's Men. That's all I'm happy about.
Well, until we revisit that later this year.
Yeah, no. I like that movie. I don't mean to cast shade on it.
You've cast shade on other podcasts about that movie, so it's okay. It'll get its just desserts. Its moment in the sun from 2 super fans of that movie. Maybe we need to bring on some little nitpicks to keep us realistic. But
some justice jumping over Indiana Jones, though, because I think one of my other movies was sandwiched in between Temple of Doom and something else. So I'm playing up with the bigger Indiana Joneses now.
All right. If you have any disagreements with our scores, like our guest email, or anything to do with basically our opinions on this movie, because there are some levels of subjectivity to it, of course, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can write us at our website, as our fan did. That is RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote Podcast, or find us on any of our socials at Gmote Podcast. That is available on X, Letterboxd, TikTok, Instagram, and I think even Facebook. We don't quite have the OnlyFans account that Best Picture Cast does.
Oh, God. Yeah, I can't. I don't know what's going on there. RDB's off creating accounts again, I think.
Remaining questions. All right, Pop. Do the Army and Air Force have beef with each other? Now, this is a question that was originally asked on the 42nd BPC episode by one Kieran B. And the easy answer to this question is I think everybody in the military has beef with the Air Force. I have experience with a brother-in-law who commonly refers to it as the chair force.
First off, you have to understand the history, which is the Army had an Air Force division. It was not separate, and the Air Force created until 1948. So it's kind of hard to have a beef with something when you're part of the same unit or same body. When they created the whole Pentagon and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and all of that, and all that was 1947. Was passed, went into effect in 48. That's where the Air Force was created. So, other than the fact that infantry kind of looked at the flyboys as being different, no, that's the only where there's a beef.
So when I saw this question on the program sheet, I sourced it out to 2 of my good friends from college who were both Army Rangers and served in Afghanistan. And these were their responses. Okay. And I'll withhold their names just because they wanted to stay anonymous. But the first one said, I think it's safe to say that all branches have a friendly rivalry. I'll give you an anecdote, though, of what contributes to the sentiment between the Army and the Air Force. Now, remember, this is coming from the Army perspective. I played rugby with an airman at Fort Drum, and he was not allowed to live in the on-base housing because the Army's standard of living in the housing there was considered unacceptable and substandard by the Air Force. Yes. And Yeah, so I thought that was
Yeah,
fun.
okay.
And then the second one, who tends to be a bit more of a cranky curmudgeon, goes, I hate anyone who brags about their service or exaggerates their experiences regardless of branch. And he just left it at that. So there you go.
I think the healthy rivalry does probably put it together, but this stems from the moment in the movie where what would you call it? The junk man, I guess, is kind of quibbling with Dana Andrews' character, and he shuts it down because he's asking for a job. Second remaining question. And I don't mean this to be crass. I mean this in total sincerity because this is a curiosity. I've invested in this character. But does Homer wear a wedding ring? And if so, how and where does he wear it?
Well, I would imagine in some bridge between then and now is, they have athletes now wear these rubber wedding rings, black rubber wedding rings. I don't think it's so, I think if it were today and he still was going hook, I think maybe he'd wrap like the rubber one around the hook, maybe. Or I would think maybe he probably just has a necklace with the ring on the necklace back then. That's probably what they did.
Well, I definitely backed up and rewatched this scene multiple times in the wedding sequence just to see if someone had given him a ring. He did not have one in the scene, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't one made for him down the line or whatever else. I'm seriously curious if how does somebody tell in that day and age when that was a big thing to say, I'm taken? How does he demonstrate that?
I know way back when, I don't know how far back when, I think only the woman wore the ring, right?
Correct. At that time frame, it was unusual for men to wear a wedding ring. It only became more prevalent as society progressed into the late 50s, early 60s. So if he was going to wear a wedding ring, it would be the normal, which would be, since he obviously has no fingers, you would put it on a chain and
That's a
wear
good
it as a
point.
necklace. Now, I recently had to take my wedding ring in to be resized because it was actually cutting into me. And if you probably can't see in the video that, because we can see each other on this, the band that's like welded into my finger, where my wedding ring has been for the last 35 years. I think I've taken my wedding ring off maybe a week total over the last 35 years. Obviously, the fact that I don't have the actual gold band is irrelevant because it's indented into my finger and you can see it in my eyes.
Nice. I have two remaining questions, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Sure.
One has kind of just always confounded me. The Boone City Beavers. So they're in sixth
The second
place
division.
in second division. So in this alternate universe, like, how does this work? Like, is this like the English Premier League where they failed to advance to what does that mean?
No.
Sixth place, second division.
You have to understand baseball history.
Now you're being offensive here.
I'm okay. Okay, I'll tip to the elders here.
Okay.
I asked the question.
All right. Baseball history, the 30s and 40s into the 50s. We only had 10 or 12 teams in each league. Okay. If you were, the upper half was in competition for the most part. Every once in a while, a team would just excel and just like run away with the pennant. Okay. The bottom 6 teams would be considered the cellar dwellers, where there's no way they could ever compete. So that's
they're in
what
12th
they're talking
place,
about.
basically.
Yeah, it was a common discussion. For example, in the National League at that time, the Phillies were always in the bottom. The Dodgers and the Giants were at the top. The Braves had a tendency to be higher up.
Gotcha.
Okay. And so that was just the way it was.
Okay.
And that's what
this last one's a little more subjective here. So these 3 marriages, let's fast forward 10 years. Rank them in order of healthiest marriage 10 years after the conclusion of this movie. So you have Homer, who just got married. Let's assume that, or well, maybe not marriages, maybe relationships, but let's assume Dana Andrews continues his relationship to the 10-year point, if you think it gets that far. And then Fredric March and his alcoholism continuing its way into his marriage. Rank them in order of healthiest relationship 10 years after the end?
By our modern version or whether they're together?
Well, if you think that any one of them split up, you can rank them last. But it's your opinion here how these relationships look 10 years after the movie closes.
Well, I give a little bit of credence to the couple that's probably already been through a lot of their early fights. So the likelihood that Myrna Loy and Fredric March are staying together is probably significantly higher. They've gone through each's proclivities. They kind of understand who each other is. And even though he's just kind of home, she still knows enough about him that the transition with them is probably less than anybody else. The second most healthy couple, probably because she idealizes him, is probably Wilma and Homer. But I still think that there's a level to which they don't communicate well with each other, since she's been blatantly saying, I love you the entire film, and he just doesn't seem to get it, and he's very repressed, and he doesn't know how to deal with his own feelings or his own sense of inadequacy. So that could possibly seep in, but given the 40s and that they were already together and the rest of it, I would guess that that's probably the likeliest to be long lasting again. If I had to put one last, and this isn't even necessarily saying they'd break up, but Dana Andrews and Teresa Wright is such an unusual matchup where she comes from a certain level of class and dignity that's above his station. He's coming from literally a hole in the wall underneath an overpass. His ability to provide and sustain, you wonder how much that's going to matter. He's technically already cheated on one wife. What's his proclivity to do it again? I mean, that's if you're taking the really cynical view, which you kind of have to in order to put one third in a movie that's so hopeful. But I guess that would be my ranking.
Dana?
For me, you have to take into account that there was a whole society, the 1950s and early 60s, the rise of Playboy magazine and the office affair and sleeping with a secretary is based on the fact that a lot of men came back from World War II and the Korean War with the attitude of, I've seen hell, I don't care, I'm going to live my life because tomorrow I may be gone, so I'm going to enjoy whatever I have and whatever. So, quite frankly, Fredric March's character is perfectly in tune to me as being the type that would be having an affair with his secretary, because he just, I'm going to take advantage of what I have available in front of me. So I actually rate their marriage, even though Myrna Loy is the most understanding and compassionate, empathetic, that he's just going to necessarily do whatever he wants because that's ultimately the most emotionally charged aspect of his life based upon his life experiences in the war. Fred is going to struggle, or Dana Andrews. I think Teresa Wright's character is going to be much more empathetic and is going to stick with him. Ultimately, Harold Russell and Wilma, and I can't remember her name. I mean, their character is going to be based in large part upon whether he continues to punish himself for his circumstances or whether he allows her to ultimately prevail, that her love for him overcomes any obstacles.
So then what is your ranking? You have one in last place, but you didn't rank the other two. The public wants to know.
Yes, Dana, anything.
They do, huh? Sounds like a National Enquirer commercial. The public wants to know. I would say Dana Andrews won, and
so you're exactly opposite to my rankings.
And I would go Hal Russell 1, Fredric March 2, and then just Dana Andrews. That's the biggest wild card as to whether will they be together for 10 years. But I like to think all three relationships will go well. Plus, you have the two family cores like he's entering in Fredric March feeling maybe that core brings everyone closer together and stuff. So, but I'm hopeful about all three of them.
Yeah, I can see your point.
Why doesn't Peggy's brother Rob attend the wedding? He has as much connection to Homer and Wilma as she does.
Maybe he was in college.
Yeah, 90 Take Willie fired his ass. That's why.
Just never seen or heard from again. He goes to bed one night and then
runs away. He enlists.
Okay, next, and I'm sure I'll catch hell for this one, but how was Fred a captain if he never had to command anyone?
Air Force, I guess.
Okay. Because when you were in the United States Army Air Corps, you started out, for example, if you were trained as a pilot or a bombardier, you were given an automatic rank of a second lieutenant. And the fact that he had been through multiple flights and had been noted with valor, he's going to get promoted on that. That's where the rank comes from. It's the level of accomplishment in the position you hold. It's not about managing or overseeing people. It's the manner of overseeing your activity.
Okay, and my last one, and this is totally from a place of ignorance. Having watched the Pacific series, were there Army infantry in the Pacific? I seem to, by that series, understand that it was mostly the Marines and the Navy.
My grandfather was one of them.
Marine or an Army infantry?
He was in the Army and he was in the Pacific. Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He worked the radios over there. Pretty much, that's the Hacksaw Ridge movie. Is aren't they Army in that?
Oh, I forget. I haven't seen that movie in probably 10 years at this point, but
yeah,
it's possible.
Yes, you have to understand, first of all, the Army controlled Corregidor and Manila, and Douglas MacArthur was an Army general. The first POWs were Army personnel that were captured on Corregidor in the Philippines. MacArthur remained a four-star general and commanded the southern portion of the Pacific Theater. The Army fought at Leyte, Luzon, southern Philippines, the North Solomon Islands, the Central Pacific, the Aleutian Islands, Papua, Guadalcanal, the archipelago. I mean, there's a ton of references to the Army fighting. And the Marines carried a large portion of it, but the Army was also heavily involved, especially in the southern portion of the Pacific campaign.
Okay.
Thank you to all our armed forces out there, past and present.
Yes, this being our Memorial Day episode, although it comes out a couple of days after, but this is our commemorative, I guess, war movies usually are generally slotted into this, but this is the exception to the rule somewhat.
Tip my G-Mode hat to you and salute you.
And finally, Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. One name, and it's an iconic name, especially for people of my generation who grew up in the 70s and 80s. This week we lost Dabney Coleman, 92, American actor, was in the film 9 to 5, was in Tootsie, The Guardian, and Recess. Won an Emmy in 1987, I believe, for Buffalo Bill. It was one of those TV shows that was only on for about half a season, and I watched every episode and thought it was hilarious. No one else watched. Another show of that time frame was Naked Gun or Police Squad. It was a TV show they later made into 3 different films. Again, way ahead of its time. But I think Dabney Coleman was a very underrated character actor from that time frame. And I can honestly say that he's one of the people or actors that I really loved as a character actor and everything he was in.
And for me, or people of my generation, those in their 30s, who watched Saturday morning cartoons and recess came on, he was the principal or the voice of the principal. So if that strikes a chord with you, that is this unfortunate passing. And so we commemorate him here with a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you. Okay, final thoughts for the week. We can start with our guest. Thank you for being on with us as always. And I know that your next upcoming episode we've already teased, but 12 Angry Men, which will be our 4th of July revisit episode. But otherwise, tell the people what you got going on.
Yeah, Best Picture cast. Come on over. We have a lot of fun with the list of Best Picture winners. You know, when I say Last Emperor, you may yawn, but we had a really fun discussion. Like it was actually a good talk. We had 3 different perspectives on it, and even the movies that may not be so much fun, we have a time talking about. So. And then if you like voting on tournaments and whatnot, we got a couple tournaments coming up at the end of the summer, our sub 50 tournament, and we'll have our horror tournament and stuff too. So we're always doing fun stuff. Follow us at Best Picture Cast on all the socials and give us a look. We interact. So, give us a shout out.
On the boring, bloated Best Picture winners that you feel like you should see, but just have not figured out a way to get past your own dread at trying to watch them, they watch the movie so you don't have to.
There you go.
But I will give it one of the highest compliments that I can of a fellow podcast. And much like I started out this particular episode saying that I just enjoy hanging out with the characters from this movie, I enjoy hanging out with, even vicariously, all of the crew from the BPC, your entire roster of people. Some of them occasionally give me some palpitations, but that's all in good fun. And I do appreciate most of the takes. There's a lot of nuance in what you're discussing, and despite I know that some people might be afraid of the length, it goes a lot quicker than you think it does when you're just kind of in amongst friends, and that's what it definitely feels like.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that great compliment. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's meant for a nice commute or a little hang. So you can pick it up and wherever you want. Or if you like Dana, you can doze off, wake up, put the playlist on. You don't even know what movie you're talking about when it pops up. However you want to enjoy Best Picture Cast, just follow and all that. We appreciate it.
Fall asleep to Broadway melody, wake up with Amadeus.
Hell yes.
Yes.
Dad, final thoughts.
Only one, which is that I'm in the process of starting, and I have kind of started on TikTok, my own movie review podcast or my own little clips that I'm going to be doing. Not only movies that are new that I see, but old movies, and especially movies we're doing on the show to help promote our show. And I've bifurcated that into a 1 to 5 on artistic quality and a 1 to 5 on entertainment, because quite frankly, there are films that are a 5 in entertainment and about a 1 in artistic quality. And so it's just my little twist on things. And I'll be doing that periodically over the next several weeks, months, hopefully longer than that.
And you can find him at Dana W. Duncan on TikTok if you are so inclined. As for mine, I will just shout out that I recently appeared on the 2005 episode of the Revisionist Almanac, and we had a good time with that one. It is a little bit of a longer episode. It's clocking in at 2 hours and 23 minutes, which is about 45 minutes longer than Korn's ever wanted a single episode to go. But there are a lot of little tidbits, inside jokes, and things that if you've listened to the show over the first, I think it's 5 episodes, this is going to be a fun one for you. So I'll just tease that. That, I believe, is coming out a couple of days after this particular episode airs.
Hard to believe that an episode you're on, Tom, is lengthy.
Well, I learned from the best that being a lawyer's kid, you just have a natural gravitas towards being verbose.
Sure.
But anyway, the only other thing I'll mention that I have coming up, other than we have the hangover next week, we will have a special episode for the 40th anniversary of Ghostbusters in 2 weeks. That we have a couple of good guests, returning guests on for that particular episode. And at some point, I'm going to call my shot now, but I think I am the new lost episode of BPC now that you've done Shape of Water. Sometime, eventually, maybe 3 or 4 years from now, it might happen, but eventually.
Still have you sized up for American Beauty, Tom, and Dana, I got you sized up for Going My Way. Talking about Bells of St. Mary's, tie that right back there. So I just have to track down Zeta Short in New Zealand and get this Return to Shakespeare in Love thing done. So we're moving in action. We just move kind of slowly around here at a glacial pace.
I will say The Shape of Water was the best film I've ever seen of a
amphibious romance.
Amphibious person.
There we go, the subgenre.
Yeah. So, but that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. She's got my grandmother's Holocaust ring. I didn't know they gave out rings at the Holocaust. Next week, for our 213th episode, we discuss one of the biggest and most celebrated comedies of the 21st century, The Hangover from 2009, celebrating its 15th anniversary. Directed by Todd Phillips, written by John Lucas and Scott Moore, music by Christoph Beck, and starring Zach Galifianakis, Bradley Cooper, Ed Helms, Mike Tyson, Heather Graham, and Ken Jeong. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you.
You know that's REELGOOD.
Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.